How can you assess such result of Ukrainian long-range strikes?
Well, I think in recent days, some of the Ukrainian long-range strikes have been very, very effective. Earlier this week, we heard that Ukraine had destroyed 4 Russian helicopters at a Russian base, which was very significant. And then, as you've described, the destruction of nearly 100 cruise missiles is very significant. I think it really shows 2 things. First of all, that the intelligence that the Ukraine military are getting, and one assumes that some of this intelligence is coming from the United States and allies like the United Kingdom, and we know that a few weeks ago America turned off some of its intelligence. It would appear that that intelligence is now free flowing again, which is an excellent thing and helpful to allow Ukraine to prosecute these long range operations. The second thing I think that's really important is showing how competent and effective Ukraine attacks can be. And a lot of the weaponry that's been used has been developed in Ukraine itself, and the accuracy and the ability to hit significant targets, because that now means there are 96 cruise missiles which will not be fired at Ukrainian hospitals and schools and power infrastructure. And a cruise missile in its own is a significant piece of equipment, costing thousands, if not millions of dollars. So this is a really important blow that Ukraine has done to not only stop the ability of the Russians to attack more and more civilian infrastructure in Ukraine, but also is a very clear message to Russia that Ukraine can be on the offensive. And now that intelligence is flowing freely again, targets are not safe in Russia. And hopefully this demonstration might well lead Putin and his negotiators to be flexible and realistic when it comes to discussing the ceasefire.
From your perspective, does the UK government still allow Ukraine to strike deep inside Russia with British-made Storm Shadow cruise missiles, because we haven't heard about these strikes for a while?
As far as I'm aware, and I've seen nothing to the contrary, that Ukraine is still able to fire British Storm Shadow missiles deep into Russia. But I have heard nothing, and I've seen nothing to contradict that in the open press or media.
Also, Ukraine recently has developed a new long-range missile with a range more than 600 miles, the Long Neptune missile. What is your take on such development?
Well, I think this is a demonstration of the capabilities that the Ukraine military and its scientific establishment and others have developed over the last 3 years. And that has been a very, very significant and very impressive piece of what the Ukraine people have been able to do. We've discussed many times the shortage of weapons and the slowness for weapons to be deployed to Ukraine. But actually, we also know that Ukraine has got on itself and has not waited for those. And this Neptune missile that we're now aware of is a personification and demonstration of that. You know, this is being able to fire, you know, a missile with a decent payload, a decent warhead, you know, over a considerable distance and be successful. This is not an insignificant capability. And again, I think it's a very positive step, again, and really a demonstration to the Russians that Ukraine's not standing still, that they are going forward and they will get better and more effective weapons, you know, as things progress. And you know, hopefully it'll also stimulate, you know, Western supporters to make sure that they continue and up their flow of sophisticated long-range missiles to Ukraine as well, so that, you know, it can get on a more even footing and start dominating the Russians more and pushing them back.
Let's cover also Ukraine ceasefire negotiations. Russia has agreed to ceasefire in the Black Sea and to partial ceasefire in the air to halt attacks on Ukrainian energy grid. What is your assessment of this stage of negotiations, and what kind of game Russia is playing, Vladimir Putin and his negotiators?
Well, I think Ukraine has been very forward-leaning and very positive for the ceasefire, and seems to be doing all that it can to try and get the ceasefire enacted. Because when Ukraine agreed to a 30-day ceasefire some time ago, and the Russians sort of agreed to it, but then attacked Ukraine infrastructure virtually before the ink was dry on the paper, and showed no signs at all of wanting a ceasefire. It would appear that the Russian solution to a ceasefire is what we're calling the Black Sea deal. In other words, allowing Russia to export goods through the Black Sea, or allowing the Russian Black Sea fleet, which Ukraine has already defeated, back into the game. And also for the prevention of attacks on power infrastructure in both countries. And I think it's very important that people in the international world realise that it's actually Russia who is suffering most. Ukraine has been very successful at attacking the hydrocarbon industry in Russia, the oil and gas, and that is where Russia is getting all its money from various countries to keep its war machine going. Russia has tried to turn off the lights and turn off the heat for the last 3 winters in Ukraine by attacking its power infrastructure, and has failed. And then we hear that Russia is demanding an end to sanctions and an opening up of the world banking facilities to Russia, which is something new, which they just throw in there so that they can say that the ceasefire has failed. So it strikes me at the moment that Putin and his negotiators are writing ceasefire deals that the Americans and others are helping with, but it's only to the advantage of Russia rather than Ukraine, and Ukraine seems to be the only country that's honouring these ceasefires. They are little bit like the 30-day ceasefire a few weeks ago. The ink is not dry on signing these agreements before the Russians break them. So Russia is not negotiating in good faith at the moment, and that is something that I think the European NATO countries, particularly Britain and France, realise. At the moment, America and the White House has its own problems of trying to sort out various leaks and others, and is less focused on this problem than really everybody else in the world would like them to be.
At the same time, Trump's national security team is really confident that a full ceasefire deal could be reached between the US, Russia and Ukraine. Do you still expect Russia to agree with a full ceasefire deal this year?
Well, one would hope so. And a lot of it does rely on the United States. It's from negotiations in Paris today. It's clear that the British and the French and some other European countries are planning to commit forces, military forces to Ukraine as a reinsurance force to guarantee a ceasefire. But it's really up to the Americans to bring Putin to the ceasefire table and get them to sign it. And at the moment, that does not seem to be the case. Certainly some of the key American negotiators seem to be more on the Moscow side than Kyiv's side, which is, seems inconceivable to us people in the UK in particular. So a full ceasefire is absolutely possible. It is going to require President Trump and some of his key supporters to get off the fence, as it were, and really lean into this. And it would appear that the European countries, led by Britain and France, are planning and ready and happy to commit military forces to Ukraine to protect and enforce a ceasefire. So it's still possible. And I think everybody, is hoping and praying that it will come to fruition. but it really needs Putin to shift and move. And at the moment, although he said